If you're looking to fit that larger set of wheels and tires and create a better stance for your 2018 or newer four-door JL Wrangler, this TerraFlex 2.5-inch coil spring-based suspension lift kit will be a great way to do it. Now this will be a good option for the JL owner who wants a mild lift to fit up to a 37-inch tire to make the Jeep more capable off-road, or if you just straight up want a more aggressive aesthetic. Now this lift kit will specifically give you everything that you need to get the height while allowing you to choose the rest of the components that you want to pair with this, like shocks and a track bar. As it says in the name, this will be a base lift, which will feature the most important components to get you that height and accommodate for the height. Now this will feature the front and rear springs, front and rear sway bar end links, and the bump stop extensions. Now I would recommend looking for a shock to pair with this kit and a track bar or a track bar relocation bracket to accommodate that height and the axle pull from switching up the geometry. However, there are many to choose from on the site. The springs will be high tensile in strength to reduce any spring sag and fatigue, and are finely tuned for great handling and comfort. Now the front and rear sway bar end lengths also measure to 10 3/4 inches and 11.5 inches while having a durable construction with reinforced handling. Now, the bump stop extensions and the strike pads will also be made of a heavy duty plastic material so you can ensure that they will hold up for the long run. Now both these springs and the sway bar end links will also have a nice black powder coat finish on top to hold up to the elements, especially with being mounted underneath the Jeep. Now this kit will come in at right around the $625 mark, making this pretty affordable compared to other kits. Now usually the rule of thumb is that the more components that a kit comes with and the more in-depth that kit is, that's usually going to up that price point. Now this again is going to be a base suspension, keeping it affordable and allowing you to customize this and tune this to your specific needs without being locked into a specific kit. Now it also allows you to build over time, and with this kit you'll get a lot of longevity from the quality components, making it a great choice for your JL. Install will be 3 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter, so I would recommend some mechanical experience for this, and it should take about 4 hours to get the job done. Now at this point we can head over to the shop and check out a detailed breakdown of the install and what it looks like step by step. So that's going to wrap it up for me. Let's go ahead and jump into it.
Tools required for this install include an air gun, an impact gun, an 18mm ratcheting wrench, a 14, 18, and 19mm wrench, a few different size extensions, a ratchet, a clip remover tool, a couple different size swivel adapters, a 10, 18, and 21mm socket, a hammer, a pair of pliers, a 6mm Allen wrench, a 6 and 8mm Allen bit, and some pole jacks. What's up guys? Today we're installing a lift kit on our Wrangler. First we're going to watch a quick little uninstall video for how to remove our stock springs, and I'll meet you right back here for the install.
So now we're going to move on to the front, and the eagle-eyed viewers out there probably noticed that our JL is missing a front bumper. Now all we did there is we took it off just so you could get a better idea of what we're doing from this angle. It makes things a little bit easier to see on video. You do not need to remove the bumper or splash guard even to get this installed. We just did it so you can see a little bit better. Now with that being said, we're basically going to do the same thing here. We got the Jeep up in the air, we got the wheels off, we have our axle tube supported with some pole jacks, and just like the rear, the first step we're going to do is loosen up some of those brake line brackets with a 10mm socket. So now we can start to work on the big stuff. We're going to start with our sway bar, which just like the rear is an 18, and then the lower shock mount, which is also an 18. Now to get to the lower portion of that sway bar end link, I have the extension and a U-joint and an 18mm socket. It is a little bit tough to get to. You can probably get it easier with a ratchet if you don't have this set up here. So now we're just gonna do the sway bar and lower shock mount for the other side. Next up is the track bar that's held on with a 21mm bolt. I have the same sort of setup I did for the sway bar end link, the extension and the U-joint. That one's a little bit tough to get at. If you do have trouble with that, you can always hit the other side, but that's gonna require a wrench. There's one more thing for us to do. There's 2 Christmas tree clips on this wire here on the passenger side. We're just gonna use a trim panel removal tool to get those out of the way. Now we're just gonna lower the pole jacks and take the tension off the springs. I'm just trying to get as low as possible here, and you can see me, I'm checking these wires, brake lines, this e-brake cable and the brake lines over here, make sure I don't go too low and damage them. Now we're just gonna work that spring out toward the lower control arm here behind the shock. Now we're just gonna work out that isolator.
So now that we have our stock springs removed from the front, the last thing we need to do is fully remove our sway bar end link. So we have an 18mm nut on the back that we can grab an 18mm ratcheting wrench to remove. And then we're also going to put a 6mm Allen bit onto our stud to prevent our ball joint from spinning. So now we'll slide our 18mm ratcheting wrench onto our nut and get our 6mm Allen wrench onto our stud. And we can break this nut loose. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So now the first thing we're going to do to install our new spring is replace our lower spring perch. So we can lift up on this to pop that out of place. And then we can grab the new one included in our kit. We have a little locating pin on the bottom that'll match up to a hole. We can pop it in just like that, and now we can work on getting our spring in. So now to install our spring, we're gonna have to lower our axle quite a bit. So before we do that, I'm just gonna pop off this breather hose here so that we don't put too much stress on it. So you can get a pair of needle nose pliers or regular pliers to pinch that hose clamp and then wiggle it off just like that. And now we can begin to lower our axle to get our spring in. So now we can begin to lower down our pole jacks evenly at the same time so that we have enough room to get our new spring in. So now we're ready to install our spring. Now the label is going to be towards the top, and then we also have to install our bump stop spacer at the bottom, but we have to slide that inside of our spring now because we won't be able to do that once our spring is in place. Now once we have our spring in on this side, we can do the same thing on the other side. Next we can install our bolt to hold in our bump stop spacer. So we have a nut that's going on the bottom side, and then we have this little tool to get up in there to hold our nut. So we'll pop that in. And then we can grab a 6mm Allen bit to tighten down our bolt. And then we'll do that same thing on the other side. So now we can install our new sway bar end links. Now we have two different sizes in this kit. The shorter one's gonna be for the front and the longer is gonna be for the rear. So we'll pop our nut off, slide it in, reinstall our nut on the other side. And then we'll be using the same 18mm ratcheting wrench and 6mm Allen wrench to tighten this down. So now we'll get that 18mm ratcheting wrench and 6mm Allen wrench to tighten this down. And then we'll do that same thing on the other side. So now I've raised our axle up a bit, but we're gonna finish raising it up so that we can get our lower shock mount into our bracket. And then we can grab our lower shock bolt. We can pull our shock the rest of the way down to get that in. And if you can't push it all the way through, you can grab a rubber mallet or a hammer just to tap it the rest of the way. And then we'll reinstall our nut on the back side. And then we can grab our 18mm wrench for our nut side and our 18mm socket on our bolt side and tighten that down. And then we'll do that same thing on the other side. And now we can reinstall our factory bolt for the bottom of our sway bar end link. And then once again, we'll be using our 18mm socket and 18mm wrench to tighten this down. And then we'll do that same thing on the other side. Now we can reinstall our breather hose onto our nipple. So we'll get it started and then grab our pair of pliers. Slide that on. Next, we can reinstall our brake line bracket. So we'll pull that bolt back out of our hole and slide our bracket back into place. We'll get our bolt started, a couple threads, and then we'll grab our 10mm socket to tighten that down. And then we'll do that same thing on the other side. Next, we can come back over to our front axle module on our passenger side and reconnect our harness, as well as our two tree clips.
So we're gonna start our installation at the rear, and the first step, obviously, get your Jeep in the air, get all of the wheels off it, and get that axle tube supported. Now, like I said, this is going to be just as hard as removing a spring, so we're gonna have to drop that rear axle tube. As we're doing that, we don't wanna stress these brake lines here, so the first step of the install is actually going to be to loosen up that bracket holding that on to make sure we don't stress those lines. It's held on with a 10mm bolt. And do the same thing for the other side. Just to keep those handy, I'm gonna thread them right back in. With the brake line brackets removed, we can further prepare to drop that axle tube. We're gonna remove the bottom of the shock mount and also the bottom of the sway bar end link on both sides. It's all held on with 18mm hardware. And with the shock out, that'll give us easy access to this side of the sway bar end link. Now we're gonna drop our track bar from the axle side with a 21mm socket. So now we have all of the big stuff out of the way. There's one more thing we have to hit before we start lowering our axle here to get the springs out, and that is our e-brake cable bracket. That's way up in there. We got the extension on the impact gun here and a 13mm socket to drop that out. Now we're gonna lower those pole jacks, release the tension on the springs, and pull them out.
So the last thing we need to do on our rear end is remove our sway bar end link. So we'll take a 18mm ratcheting wrench on our nut and a 6mm Allen wrench in the stud to prevent our ball joint from spinning. And then we can fully remove our nut and slide our end link out of the way. Now, once we have our end link fully removed on the driver's side, we can do that same thing on the passenger. So now we're ready to install our new rear springs. So we're gonna get our rubber isolator from the top of our factory spring and slide that on. And then we can slide this up into place. We can pull down on the axle a little bit to get the clearance we need to get our spring seated. So now you can grab a buddy to help you pull down on the axle a little bit to get the remaining clearance that you need to pop that spring into place. And then once we have our spring seated on this side, we'll do the same thing on the other side. So now we can finish raising up our axle tube so that we can get our lower shock bolt into our shock mount. So we'll pop that out of the bottom of our shock. Then we can pull down on our shock to get that the rest of the way and feed our bolt through. Get our nut on the other side. And then we can grab our 18mm socket and 18mm wrench to tighten this down. So now we're ready to install our new sway bar end links. Now our ball joint is going to go at the bottom. So we'll remove that nut. So now we're going to slide this in behind our brake lines and through our lower mount. And then we can get our nut on the back side. And then at the top, we're gonna be installing our hardware that came with our kit. So we'll slide our bolt through and then get our nut on the backside. And at the top, we're gonna be tightening that down with an 8mm Allen bit and a 19mm wrench. And then on the bottom, we can get an 18mm ratcheting wrench, as well as a 6mm Allen wrench. And tighten that down. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. Next, we can install our bump stop spacer. Now we're going to be using the inside set of holes. We'll raise that up and put our button head bolt through the top, and then get our nut on the bottom. And then same thing on the back side. And then we can get our 6mm Allen bit for our bolt and a 14mm wrench for our nut to tighten that down. And now we can install our actual spacer. So we're going to take our threaded plate and slide that in. And now we can thread our bolts through our lower bracket and into our plate. And then we'll take our 8mm Allen bit to tighten those down. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So now the last thing we have to do to button up our rear is go back and reinstall our brake line bracket. So we'll pull that bolt back out, slide that into place. And then we can tighten that back down with our 10mm socket. And we'll do that same thing on the other side. So now we're ready to reinstall our track bar bolt. So you're gonna have a buddy in the driver's seat that can turn the wheel back and forth. Go back a little bit. And then we can get it to line up. And we'll put our nut on the back side. And now once we have our bolt threaded into our nut plate, we can tighten that down with our 21mm socket. So now with the front and rear wrapped up, we've got the Jeep back on the ground, back on wheels and tires, and we can go back to the front and install our track bar bolt. So that'll wrap up this review and install of the TerraFlex 2.5-inch coil spring base suspension lift kit for your 2018 and newer Jeep Wrangler JL 4-door. Thank you for watching, and for all things Wrangler, keep it right here at extremeterrain.com.